Okay, right. So I think this is roughly where it started. So it's about midday, it's the end of week 3. So we're going to go quick tour of everything I've planted so far, see how it's doing, maybe have a little comment on that, and then we're going to get on with this week's. Okay, I've written them down on my hand, so we should be able to do it in order. I think we should have about 40 minutes to an hour before it starts raining again. So let's get on with it. Right, so week 1 was planting of the first 3 Pachira. You can see they're looking pretty healthy. They've got some healthy new leaves, a little bit water stressed maybe, but nothing too dramatic. The aloes have not yet rooted, so they're still a little bit red, but they're less red than they were a couple of days back, so there's probably some roots forming. And the dracaenas have got their usual sort of post-planting tilt. This is the wild type Dracaena fragrans. The tilt isn't too dramatic, and they don't seem to be badly sunburnt. You can see the growth point is leaning right over. That'll probably be a permanent kink once it settles in. You can also see a certain amount of perking up on the opuntias that were chucked down around here. Fair few of them are now showing upright leaves. I don't think these are entirely new leaves. I think most of them are probably old leaves that are just somewhat reoriented to fit their new situation. So yeah, so day 1, pretty happy. So now on to day 2. Day 2 was the 5 Gmelinas. You can see from this one that the growth point has perked up. It's no longer floppy as it was, which means the roots are taking. The aloe arborescens doesn't show as much water stress as the cameronii, but it's much less inclined to change colour anyway, so it's harder to know until they fall down and die. But the calico is doing fine because it's pretty much unkillable, and the Gmelina seems to have perked up quite a lot too. The same is the case for the second one. And the third one, which kept a couple more of its leaves, has also perked up. Fourth one has definitely got some new growth coming. And the fifth one, which is the one that had more of its leaves left on than any of the others, is definitely back in perky mode. So generally speaking, quite happy with that. A couple of the aloes are a little bit toppled, or one of them. But that should be fine. They'll just branch out from the bases. So yeah, so on to day 3. Day 3 was the Bauhinias. Bauhinia variegata, because we've now complicated that story. The larger ones suffered quite a lot of sunburn to begin with. The leaves are reasonably perky, so I think this will actually recover despite some root damage on this particular one. The smaller ones, for the most part, seem to look absolutely fine. There should be a couple more in here that I'm not seeing. Oh no, they're just all very close together. Mostly the smaller ones look fine. The aloe is very red at the moment, as it's sort of responding to water stress. This might end with it flowering, but I'm not seeing any sign of a flower shoot yet. And the cornstalk variety of the dracaena is actually, despite having been sunburned really badly, I'll first point out, is actually starting to straighten up really well. So I'm hopeful this will actually take quite well and thrive until it needs to be propagated to elsewhere when the Bauhinia is too big for it. The second Bauhinia was planted on the same day, well, second cluster, but we're counting it as one tree because insurance. Once again, the largest one was in the most sun. There is some new growth coming along here, but otherwise it's very badly burnt. The smaller ones, again, very much happier plants. And the dracaena in this one's case seems rather more sunburnt, but it is also straightening up. So hopefully that'll go well. The aloe, interestingly, on this one seems a little less stressed, but that might just be the size of it. It had a little bit more water to begin with, so it's not gotten as stressed. Okay, so on to day 4. Okay, so day 4 was the Washingtonia filifera, I'm hoping. Well, thinking. I don't mind if it's robust, so don't worry, little one. You can see it's still pretty healthy. There's a little bit of yellowing on the leaves. I think that might have been a little bit of sun damage because we did have a couple of quite hot days there. But otherwise, it seems perfectly happy. No sort of variation in terms of its growth. There doesn't seem to be any new growth, but palms aren't exactly speedy generally, with some exceptions which we might talk about in a few years' time if we're still doing this sort of thing. The cotyledons are looking very perky, of course. These were already rooted when I planted them in. Tends to be with cuttings, you'll get the same as the dracaena, sort of flop over. The aloe CF neriensis is actually flowering. Well, it's coming into flower, which is nice. Quite a lot of the stalking aloes will do this. When they're cut, they'll flower straight after cutting. The cameronii will usually do that. The arborescens usually won't. And the larger one that I don't have a name for at all doesn't seem to. But yeah, so that is day 4. So let's go and check on day 5. Okay, day 5 is a little bit more of a mixed bag. So the dracaenas generally, actually, one of them has stood pretty well. The other one has flopped quite bad. It'll probably lose the meristem by the look of things, and then it'll just branch up from the parts that remain, sometimes right from the ground. Although usually with this version it'll be higher up when it does decide to recover. The aloes, you can see, are very water stressed, very nice and red, very pretty, but it shows they're not as rooted yet as they could be. And then you can see there's a little bit of texture coming back to this leaf, but this suffered very badly from sunburn. Even the rather small ones suffered quite badly, but you can see it's a little bit perkier. Calico is obviously fine. The smallest of the transplanted ones I think will actually die. It got very burnt. All of them got quite burnt, and this one is still showing quite a lot of water stress, so I'm not sure if it'll take, but I did think that to begin with, so it's not all that surprising that it's not overly stressed. So hopefully at least one of the 4 will take, because I'm only counting it as 1 in the overall count. Okay, so then from here we are going to day 6. So day 6 was the African quinine, or Rauvolfia, which my sister wants you all to know is now called Rolf the Rauvolfia, although she did have some other suggestions for its name as well. It is reasonably perky. There's definitely some texture coming back to the leaves. They're still rather droopy. Doesn't seem to have suffered really with sunburn at all. It's got some insects moving in there, which is probably good. The small branches are definitely regaining a little bit of their sort of capacity to stand, and the dracaena itself has stood up pretty well. It did have a little bit of droop earlier, I think, but it's staying pretty well. It's quite sheltered here because there's some big guava trees behind it, which is part of the reason for the Rauvolfia. And of course this, I'll beep that, and of course the alligator plant slash mother of thousands is doing its best to reproduce while there's some open soil nearby, so that is something. Okay, so, and the Aloe neriensis, this was actually one from a relatively shady spot that had fallen over. You can see it has suffered a little more in the sun than the ones that were already a little bit sun hardened, but its growth point seems healthy, the leaves are firm, and it should root quite soon. So let's check on day 8. Day 8 was the Bambusa vulgaris, which can take a little while to settle in, so I'm not overly surprised that it's not immediately showing massive growth. That said, the growing parts are generally healthy, with a few exceptions. It does get mixed in with a cane growing there behind it that I don't want, that it should eventually exclude. But yeah, it just generally seems healthy, but I would not expect this to really show anything massive for about a year or so. Usually they really have a lag in settling in. Let's go and check on the other one. So very much the same story with the other one, maybe a little bit of actual new growth down there. But generally speaking, you've got some healthy life around the newest growth when it was transplanted, but the older leaves have mostly fallen off entirely. But yeah, this is more or less what I would expect in a transplant that has taken, or in one that hasn't, because They look very much the same for a while. I've had some die right down to the ground, seem like they haven't taken, then 2 years later you have a whole new stalk coming up. Yeah, so that's roughly where it should be. So let's go and check on day 8. Day 8 was the Syagrus queen palms, which seem to be in pretty good shape overall. The only companion planting they got was the calincos, really, which are thriving because there is very little you can do to distress calico fetchingkoi. It is, until it dries out and it changes colour a bit, it is more or less just happy to exist. So yes, that is day 8. So let's go and check on day 9. So day 9 was the planting of the Brachystegias that had popped up in plant pots. So this is Brachystegia spiciformis, which should be Musase, and like 19 other names. It's one of the dominant trees in this environment. The very large trees you'll sometimes see in the backgrounds of shots will be this one. So this little one seems pretty perky, so do the Washingtonia and the Calico longiflora. The dracaena, as per usual, is flopped right over. The aloe actually hasn't gone red yet, despite being another cameronii, I think. Oh, hang on, no, that's why. This isn't cameronii, this is one of the sort of tree-sized aloes whose name I do not yet know. The Trichilia is looking fine. It seems like its growth point might not be thriving, so it'll probably branch instead of growing from there. But the lovely Ficus Saloa, not Fatida, Saloa, seems pretty healthy, which is no great surprise until the moles eat its base, which is unlikely for one that's not irrigated, but can happen. It's probably going to be fine. One of the other one of the other Brachystegias is not looking so great. It's looking a little bit sunburnt mostly, so that might still recover from that. Any of the parts that are shaded by the calico are actually a little bit greener, so it may not be terminal. That might just be a temporary setback. And then the last one, which is the most sheltered, and the one that was being threatened by a snail the other day, is actually looking fine. So I think I was quite probably correct to count this as 2, because we've got 2 that seem to have taken fine, and the other space, which had 2 little seedlings go in, only one of them is looking present at all and the other one is vanished. So yes, that was day 9, so on to day 10. Right, so day 10 was the Thaumatophyllum, which I think is Thaumatophyllum bipinna something. Very long name. It seemed pretty healthy in there. It actually seems to be stretching out a bit more than it was, which is good. So I might, once it looks a little bit bigger and more robust, I might take away some of this bamboo just to give it a little bit more space there. I have actually been given another Thaumatophyllum, which I think is a different species. I think the other one is Xanadu. I think this is Bipinnatifidum or something, which I will have to find somewhere to put, but that can go in once it's no longer raining, because they will be going in irrigated. The peperamias are doing their usual thing. They're a little bit soft immediately after transplanting. Peperamia, sorry. They should be fine though. They're usually pretty tough once they settle in. And then the Sansevieria, which should be the Sansevieria parva, it might be one of the dwarf trifasciatums. I might have got that mixed up. I do have both. But that seems like it hasn't even noticed, so that's good. Okay, so that is day 9. Let us get on with day 10. No, hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That is day 10, sorry. That is day 10. Let us get on with day 11. Right, day 11 was the mixed planting. You can see where I dug up the clump of hard grass to plant the Phoenix. The soil is rather low, but that should just mean these ones get rather more water, which is good because this is the Aloe neriensis, which is the most stressed. The Phoenix seems like it's losing a couple of its basal leaves, but otherwise seems fairly healthy, and that might actually be a bit of new growth, I'm not sure. The dracaena here is a little bit flopped, but not too badly. But that might get a little bit worse if we have a dry spell for a few days. The agaves are absolutely fine, of course. The opuntias have not responded yet. A little bit of sunburn on a couple of them, maybe. We've got our first Jacaranda is a little bit floppy in the new growth, but seems healthy. The older leaves have regained their texture. The Aloe arborescens down here is perfectly happy, and the alligator plants, mother of thousands, Digramontiana Kalinko, is absolutely fine. Another happy agave. The Aloe cameronii is going a bit red, so it has noticed that it's been transplanted. This was the next Jacaranda, who's maybe a little bit more stressed. New growth is not 100%, but it is reasonably healthy. The dracaena itself not too tipped, so I'm not too unhappy with that. This is the one that's going to be a little upsetting, I think. It might not be. Oh, no, not too bad. I thought this Thespesia was probably going to have given up the ghost, but there's still life in there. It's actually perked up a little bit from where it was last week. Not much, but a little bit, which I will take as a win. The Aloe cameronii, again, a little bit of water stress, not too bad. And the dracaena leaning over a little bit, but not... It's worse than the others, but I wouldn't say that is branching damage. That's probably just going to have a kink when it straightens up. Okay, the flame tree, the Spathodea. Here you can see the growth points just died, but the mature leaves seem to have pretty good texture, so I think that's probably rooting fine in here. This dracaena is definitely the most stressed of these ones. It is leaning right over, probably because I opened this part up the most when I scythed for it. And then finally the last Jacaranda, from which I don't know if I actually took the tip or it has fallen off since, but got some lovely new growth coming there, so that's good. Definitely a reasonably healthy little plant. And this is by far the happiest of the 6 dracaenas of this planting. It's actually quite firm up top. Might not even have a visible kink once it's settled in. So yeah, I'm happy with that. Maybe I need to scythe a little less far back from where I'm planting, at least to begin with. Yeah, so that's day 11. So on to... So that is day 11, and let us go on to day 12. Right, day 12, which I almost skipped straight over, because it seems to have settled in like it was always here, is the Dombeya, which is pretty healthy. You can see there's some new growth there with some nice red leaves. Everything seems well. I mean, it was already in a pot. The roots weren't particularly damaged by taking it out of the pot. So yes, so this should settle in quite nicely, and the previous Dombeyas or anything to go by, I should be able to start pruning off some of the bottom branches towards the end of the year. The dracaena it's with is looking a little bit sorry for itself. A little bit of sunburn as well as everything else, but I wouldn't be overly worried. Maybe a loss of the meristem again, but again, this one tends to branch quite well above the ground when that happens, so it's still going to be conspicuous. And the Aloe neriensis is definitely not thrilled, but it's not actually sunburned, it's just showing a bit of water stress, and once it roots in this sort of weather, that should pick up quite quickly. I mean, you can see there's actually puddles on some of the leaves down there. So there's definitely plenty of water around, so it doesn't really need to worry. Once those roots come in, it should perk right back up pretty quickly. Okay, so now back to where I was heading, day 13. Day 13 is the Moringa, which is actually looking really good, like genuinely thriving. So the little aloe that went in with it, which was transplanted from a fairly shady spot, and it was just cut, there were no roots, is actually looking very healthy. This is a relatively sheltered spot, so although it's got sun drying, it won't have any wind drying really. But yeah, I'm really pleased with that. That is very vigorous new growth, pretty healthy. 10 out of 10. So let's get on to day 14 then. Right, day 14, which we've walked past a few times already, was the inadvertent fig, which had rooted from a bit of, had leafed from a bit of root, I guess, which is looking a little sorry for itself. There's a little bit of water stress, but no sunburn, because as you can see, got quite a nice bit of shelter up here in the form of a guava thicket, so there's never really any direct sun. The dracaena also is very much happy with the lack of direct sun, as is the Sansevieria, also dracaena, but Sansevieria type down there. So that's pretty happy, and it was planted with a Mangifera. Mango is so much quicker to say. The standard should be this sort of small yellow type mango, which is the best, which is in pretty good health. The new growth isn't sunburned, it seems pretty healthy, still a little bit soft, so I don't think it's fully rooted into its new place. Obviously it had roots, they haven't settled in properly. A little bit more exposed here, so a little bit of stress from the dracaena, but nothing major. Pretty happy with that too. So let us get on to day 15. I've lost count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yeah, day 15. Okay, so day 15 was some more Pachira. These ones were not in pots, they were ones that had self-seeded, some little volunteers. And 1, 2, pretty healthy. And 3, so yeah, so even though they're pretty exposed, we've got some happy little bits of new growth coming on here. The aloes are a little bit stressed, but not very much. I suspect that will deepen soon. The dracaenas have flopped over quite a bit, but overall pretty happy with how the Pachira is going, and hopefully the dracaenas and the aloes will pick up in time. So that was day 15, and let us go and check on day 16. Okay, so this is day 16, which was the bay laurel, Laurus nobilis, which is, again, it's a pretty resilient tree. There's no sign of any stress. There's actually a little bit of new growth coming, which is good. So I'm, generally happy with that. It's in a very sheltered spot, so it shouldn't really suffer too much sun stress. You can see even the aloe hasn't discoloured it sort of notably at all. The two cotyledons, well, the cotyledon and the calico, are both reasonably happy. The cotyledon, the calico thursifolia will probably show some stress and a little bit of etiolation once the sun moves a little bit further north and there's even less light getting to this, but then I'll do a little bit of pruning up above, and hopefully that should open things out so we're not too dark here, but not too bright. So yeah, so happy with that. So on to day 17 and back and forth again. Day 17 was the freely throated rough lemons, Citrus jambiri, which are, I have to say, looking just fantastic. I knew they were already a little bit sun hardened from where they were being kept, but they are looking, you know, just that there have been some sunny times when they are not showing any stress at all. The aloe is showing a little bit of water stress, which, yeah, that'll deepen quite a bit unless we have a sort of biblical rain for a little while. There's no real stress yet from the yucca, but that'll take a while, probably a month or so before that's showing significant stress. Yeah, that little lemon's fine, and if we go and check on its little friend, Maybe a little bit more sunburn here. I'm not sure that's sun damage or insect damage. That's probably more insect. But it's not as fantastic, but it's pretty well sheltered and it seems pretty vibrant still. Again, we wouldn't really expect that much yet. The only real signs of stress here are the ginger bushes. The leaves are drooping right down, but the only reason I leave all the leaves on them is they are incredibly tough and they will almost certainly perk back up in a week or so. And they might even flower prematurely with a little bit of stress, so definitely worth it. So that was day 17. Let us go and check day 18. Okay, day 18 was the Indian tamarind. Tamarindus indicus. Not Indian, African. You can see, like a lot of the sort of mimosa form, I guess, legumes, it's doing the sensible thing when it's a little bit unsure about its water availability and it's folded its leaves up. That'll probably perk up in a few days. I have to say, at night it's been looking much more open generally, so I'm not too worried about this, probably just it being a little bit sensitive while it gets settled. You can see the leaves on the jade bush. I was worried they'd get sunburned. They haven't, but they have sort of lost a lot of their texture. So this is using up that, which probably means it's actually putting a lot of water and energy into rooting. So that is good, actually. The dracaena here actually went in a couple of days before it, and you can see that is significantly perkier than it was on the planting day. It's a two-headed one, which I presume there was a flower stalk there or something. But so yes, that looks pretty good. Let's check day 19 now. Right, so day 19 is the Bauhinia petersiana, which I said I wasn't sure was sun hardened, and I think that's being confirmed. There's a little bit of sun damage you can see happening to the leaves here. Might think it was dust, but I think that's actually sunburn. The leaves are feeling a little bit soft, a little softer than they were, but overall nothing too stressful. The new growth is a bit soft, but it's definitely not dead yet. I left the leaves on the bamboo canes I used for shelter just to give it a little bit longer to sort of settle in, and that should all fall off and make mulch. The moles have not yet destroyed the little Aloe CF grandidentata. The calincos are fine, just a bit muddy from the rain. And the which one? Aloe cameronii is, yeah, not had time yet to show any water stress, so give it a few days and we'll see how that does. Okay, so happy with that, and on to day 20. Back and forth and back again. So this is day 20, which is the Dovialis second part, I'm not saying. So this was what went in last night in the dark, which no one could see. There, for interest, is the Pachira, which I said was Saloa, and it's actually, sorry, it is Pachira Saloa, I said Fatida, which was a mistake. It's fine. It will probably continue to be fine until some mole rats come along and decide that it's food. But they might not, because it's not irrigated here and they tend to ignore unirrigated ones. The aloes, of course, no stress yet because freshly in. I had worried a little bit that the dracaena might fall over last night because it's a longer one. It came from one of the propagates that I'd forgotten I had. Lovely, just briefly take you over to that acria there. Just a lovely native butterfly feeds on the milkweeds. I'm not actually sure which species that is. There's a whole bunch of native species, but nice to see. Anyway, the dracaena is, yeah, it's definitely showing some initial stages of water stress. That you can see. This was one from shade. The top is already drooping over, and it was literally cut last night. But the overall, nothing's fallen over. Everything seems roughly where I put it, so the rain hasn't moved things about, which means I planted things better than I was worried I had. Okay, so now that I've worked up a bit of a sweat walking around with that, let's go and get today's planting done, shall we? So today's planting is a tree that was kind of an insurance policy. When I first planted the Thespesia garckeana in with the 3 Jacarandas, the Spathodea and the Phoenix, I really thought it might not survive because it had got a little bit of root damage when in the transplanting, because it was a volunteer that came up right by a wall. I think it was by a wall. Anyway, it came up somewhere it couldn't thrive. Dug it up, but I wasn't convinced it was going to manage. So when I saw one quite cheap in a nursery, I thought, well, if I get that one, then I can have another one to replace that with. But as that one has rather sort of perked up, and not wanting to throw another one in the same sort of location, having seen them in quite shady spots in the forest reserve, I thought it'd be quite nice to put one in a spot that doesn't get watered well, but is somewhere that will be very ornamental, because they are a very ornamental tree when they're flowering. They are, you know, it's very much like a hibiscus flower, and it changes color over the course of the day. Really beautiful. Fruit is edible. I'm not overly taken with it, but some people really like it. Kind of like chewing a bit of rough-skinned treacle to me. It is about to rain. You can probably hear the wind. So in with that, I'm putting some moonshine, I think it is, Sansevieras, which are very pale, low chlorophyll ones. I find they tend to stand up quite well to the mold, because even though their bases do get eaten, they're broad enough, they tend to stay standing, reroot from where they are, and do quite well. Occasionally after that they'll revert to the basic type, but I don't mind. It's quite a nice ornamental looking type. I can very easily take out any reversions and move them somewhere else where I want a reverted type. Whereas here, by the bench, by the pond, it should be quite nice having the more ornamental moonshine. And you might recognize this is where I put in a rather tall aloe last year. If you watched last year's series, that fell over. It is rooting both ends of where it fell over, but right at the base of where I put it in is where I put the Thespesia, and I put another of the same type of aloe, which is the Aloe CF nieriensis, just on the other side of it. Right, so before it tips with rain, and this does look like a big storm, before it tips down with rain, or I get a branch on my head, I'm going inside. So that should be it for today. Enjoy!